Hello, everyone, welcome back to the Impact Report. Please subscribe and like my videos. We are witnessing a moment that many believed was impossible, a moment that could permanently change the political and military landscape of Eastern Europe. The shocking reports coming out of Belarus suggest that senior military generals have turned against President Alexander Lukashenko, triggering what appears to be the most serious internal power struggle the country has seen since its independence. For decades, Lukashenko ruled Belarus with an iron grip, relying heavily on the loyalty of the armed forces, security services, and internal police. Now the very structure that kept him in power is showing deep fractures, and the world is watching closely as events unfold in real time. From the outside, Belarus has long projected the image of stability and rigid control. Military parades in Minsk, armored vehicles rolling through the streets, disciplined troops marching beneath red and green national flags, and Lukashenko himself standing confidently in military uniform created an exterior image of absolute authority. The Belarusian armed forces were portrayed as united, professional, and unwaveringly loyal to the presidency. Barracks, air bases, and command centers appeared calm and orderly, with no visible signs of rebellion. State media reinforced this image daily, broadcasting footage of exercises, inspections, and speeches that emphasized unity and readiness. To the international observer, Belarus looked sealed, controlled, and resistant to internal collapse. But behind that hardened exterior, pressure had been building for years. Inside the Belarusian military and political system, dissatisfaction quietly grew. Officers who once believed in the promise of stability began questioning endless repression, economic stagnation, and international isolation. Younger commanders, trained in modern military thinking, became increasingly frustrated by outdated doctrines and the constant use of force against civilians. The interior of this crisis is complex, layered, and deeply rooted in years of silent resentment. Meetings behind closed doors, private conversations among generals, and internal reports painted a very different picture from the one shown on television. The military, once unified by loyalty, was increasingly divided by ideology, morality, and fear of being used as a political weapon rather than a national defense force. This internal tension intensified after repeated crackdowns on protests, where soldiers and security personnel were ordered to confront their own people. Many officers reportedly struggled with these orders, especially when peaceful demonstrators included families, veterans, and even relatives of service members. The psychological strain on the armed forces cannot be overstated. Loyalty to the state began to conflict with loyalty to conscience. Within military academies and command units, discussions emerged about the future of Belarus, about what would happen if the current leadership continued down a path of isolation and repression. These discussions, once unthinkable, slowly transformed into coordinated resistance among high-ranking officials. As reports suggest, the turning point came when several senior generals allegedly refused direct orders from the presidential administration. This act alone sent shockwaves through the system. The interior dynamics shifted rapidly, with communication lines strained and trust eroding. Units began waiting for confirmation before acting, a clear sign of fractured command. Some military bases reportedly entered lockdown not to suppress rebellion, but to prevent chaos. The power struggle moved from whispers to action, and the once tightly controlled interior of the Belarusian military machine began to unravel. In terms of performance, the Belarusian military has always been considered capable, disciplined, and strategically positioned. It inherited much of its structure from the Soviet era, maintaining strong ground forces, air defense systems, and rapid response units. During this crisis, performance is measured not by battlefield engagement but by decision, making under extreme political pressure. How units respond, whether they follow Lukashenko, the generals, or attempt neutrality, defines the effectiveness of the military at this historic moment. Reports indicate that some units prioritized stability and civilian safety, avoiding confrontation unless absolutely necessary. This restraint itself is a form of performance, signaling a shift in military culture from blind obedience to calculated responsibility. Safety features, in this context, refer to the mechanisms within the state designed to prevent total collapse. Emergency protocols, internal security frameworks, and command redundancies were meant to protect the government from coups. Ironically, these same systems may now be preventing widespread violence by slowing decision-making and forcing multiple layers of confirmation. They reduce the risk of sudden bloodshed. The presence of disciplined troops maintaining order rather than aggressively advancing suggests that parts of the system are focused on preventing civil war. For civilians in Minsk and other cities, this cautious posture has so far limited mass violence, though the situation remains extremely fragile. The unique selling points of this moment, from a global perspective, are its rarity and implications. A military turning against a long-standing authoritarian leader without immediate foreign intervention is unusual. Belarus is not a failed state, nor is it engaged in active war. This internal rupture sends a powerful message to other authoritarian regimes. Military loyalty is not infinite. The Belarusian case highlights how prolonged repression, economic hardship, and moral fatigue can eventually erode even the strongest security apparatus. It also places Belarus at a crossroads, with the possibility of reform, negotiation, or further internal conflict. The price of this power struggle is already being felt. Economically, uncertainty has rattled markets and businesses. Politically, Belarus risks deeper isolation or, alternatively, a chance to re-engage with the international community depending on the outcome. For the military personnel involved, the personal cost is enormous. Careers, reputations, and even lives hang in the balance. For Lukashenko himself, the price may be the end of his decades-long rule, something few believed would happen through internal military dissent. As this situation develops, the world remains cautious. Neighboring countries monitor borders, diplomats issue carefully worded statements, and analysts debate every new report. The conclusion of this unfolding story is still unwritten. What is clear, however, is that Belarus has entered a historic phase. Whether this moment leads to peaceful transition, negotiated reform, or further instability depends on decisions being made right now behind closed doors. The loyalty of generals, the restraint of soldiers, and the resilience of civilians will determine the country's future. This is not just a Belarusian story. It is a global reminder that power built solely on force is never truly secure. As the hours pass and information continues to emerge, the internal balance of power inside Belarus grows even more unstable. Military units that once followed orders without question are now carefully weighing every command, assessing not just legality but legitimacy. This hesitation is unprecedented in a system built on rigid hierarchy. Soldiers are watching their commanders closely, and commanders are watching each other, aware that a single decision could determine whether they are remembered as protectors of the nation or enforcers of repression. The atmosphere inside barracks and command centers is tense and heavy, filled with uncertainty and quiet calculation. Inside the corridors of power, communication has become fragmented. Orders issued from the presidential administration reportedly face delays, revisions, or silent resistance. Some generals are said to be coordinating indirectly, using trusted intermediaries rather than official channels, a sign that trust in the central command has eroded significantly. This internal restructuring, though informal, reflects a military attempting to regain control of its own identity. For years, the armed forces were an extension of political authority. Now they appear to be redefining themselves as an institution accountable to the nation, rather than a single leader. The psychological impact on rank-and-file soldiers is profound. Many joined the military believing they were serving Belarus, protecting its sovereignty and people. Being placed in the middle of a political confrontation has shaken that belief. Reports suggest that morale varies widely between units, with some expressing renewed purpose in protecting civilians, while others struggle with fear of retaliation or confusion about who truly holds authority. The interior of this crisis is not just strategic but deeply human, marked by anxiety, moral conflict, and the weight of history pressing down on every individual involved. Performance during this phase is increasingly measured by restraint. Units that avoid escalation, prevent clashes, and maintain basic order are being quietly praised within military circles. This shift away from aggressive enforcement towards stabilization indicates a subtle but important evolution in doctrine. Rather than projecting dominance, the focus appears to be on preventing irreversible damage to the state. This approach has so far limited widespread violence, but it also prolongs uncertainty, as no decisive resolution has yet emerged. Safety mechanisms within Belarusian society are being tested to their limits. Civil infrastructure, transportation networks, and public services continue to function, albeit under strain. The continued operation of these systems is crucial, as any breakdown could rapidly escalate the crisis. Military units stationed near critical infrastructure have reportedly been instructed to prioritize protection over control, ensuring that power plants, communication hubs, and hospitals remain operational. This emphasis on safeguarding the essentials reflects an awareness that the true danger lies not only in political collapse but in humanitarian consequences. The uniqueness of this moment lies in its ambiguity. Unlike dramatic coups characterized by immediate arrests or televised announcements, this situation unfolds quietly, almost cautiously. There are no triumphant declarations, no tanks storming palaces, no dramatic overthrow broadcast to the nation. Instead, there is a slow, deliberate shifting of loyalties and influence. This subtlety makes the situation harder to interpret, but no less significant. It suggests a struggle not just for power, but for legitimacy, stability, and the future direction of the country. International observers are struggling to interpret signals coming from Minsk. Official statements remain vague, emphasizing sovereignty and internal affairs, while diplomatic activity behind the scenes intensifies. Belarus's traditional allies watch carefully, wary of instability, but also cautious about overt involvement. The absence of immediate foreign intervention underscores how internal this crisis truly is. It is being driven not by external pressure, but by accumulated internal dissatisfaction and institutional fatigue. The economic price of prolonged uncertainty is beginning to surface more clearly. Businesses delay investments, currency markets fluctuate, and public confidence weakens. Ordinary citizens, while not fully aware of the details, sense that something fundamental is shifting. Long lines at banks, increased demand for basic goods, and a noticeable tension in public spaces reflect a society bracing for change. The military's handling of this phase will be critical in determining whether economic disruption remains manageable or spirals into crisis. For Lukashenko, this period represents perhaps the greatest test of his rule. His authority, once unquestioned within the security apparatus, now appears conditional and contested. Attempts to reassert control through speeches or symbolic gestures have limited impact when loyalty is no longer guaranteed. The image of invincibility that sustained his leadership for decades is visibly cracked. Whether he chooses negotiation, confrontation, or strategic retreat will shape not only his legacy but the trajectory of Belarus itself. As days turn into weeks, the possibility of dialogue emerges as a potential